And why it's interesting to do that? Because we are living in a time where nothing is related to us anymore. And many things tend to be separated from us. We are cast outside reality. Since the first industrial machines, it was the same thing. They say we are much more cast outside reality that doesn't need us anymore to work. So that's why Foucault was speaking about that. That's why it was the last course he gave before dying. Because he said, hey, be careful, there is one risk. We are disappearing. So, it's the new course of February 10. That is to say, it's almost the end, because the year was very short in the French college. And it speaks about a conception, or more, just only a conception, but a type of vocable, a type of understanding the becoming a subject, and not a subject as a foundation, but a subject as a result, which was the idea of conversion. Conversion, you have that a lot in Christianism. Christianism is a type of religion that asks you to convert yourself. Conversion also exists in Islam. For example, there is no real conversion in Judaism. It was not thought as such. It is possible to be converted in Buddhism also. And this idea of being converted came not from Christianism, it was borrowed from this period of Hellenistic philosophy, and we've got the idea of this movement to turn. It's a way of going ahead and turn in the same way. So in Latin it's volte, and you have that in revolution. Conversion, revolution means the same. And so here Foucault recalls the symbolic reference to the spinning top, which is in Greek rhombos. And it was a symbol very used during antiquity, and you have still, for example, in this 18th century painting from Jacques-Siméon Sardin, French painter, and Chardin was with Poussin also. All these great painters from the 18th century in France were very highly symbolistic, and there are many symbols in that painting. And so this is the rhombos. So in the spinning top, the outer part is agitated, and the center is standing, immobile. That's the idea. Out is moving, in is stealing, standing totally still. Which is, by the way, the ideal situation of the matured subject. The world seems to turn around him or her, and inside he is totally still. And this is the conversion of the movement in a certain way. You externalize the movement. You are not moved anymore. There is no emotion. That's the idea, emotion. Emotion means to be moved in. This is the emotion is the opposite of that. That is to say, in emotion, the out movement is in.
you are exposed to the movementation of the world. That is emotion. That's why when you've got some emotion, you are moved. So you are revolted in a certain way. And here it's a way of being revolt, or volt in another way. So the purpose of that path is to fix the heart in its own immobile center, to find in you, as you, immobility. That is to say, and you see Christianity here, eternity. Because no movement means no time and no space. No time, no space, eternity. That's the definition of being eternal. So it is a way of also discovering this famous divine part, godly part, inside the being's the self. You know that's very strange because you've got that idea also in a very ancient text in Buddhism, in the ancient sutra of the great vehicle of the Mahayana. And you've got some sort of dialogue. The Buddha and the disciple are just in front of the Ganga river. And they are speaking about precisely permanency and non-permanency or impermanency, which is nitya and anitya in Sanskrit. And the Buddha is asking, so do you remember when you was a young boy, a teenager, a grown man, and now an old man? And so, yeah, where is the self, of course, because it is not the same person. But nevertheless, the Buddha points, and that's why maybe it's not a totally Buddhist sutra, maybe it was a bit twist, because he's pointing out the fact that the consciousness of the Ganga was the same when he was a little boy, when he was a teenager, when he was a grown man, when he was an old man. The fact of being aware of the Ganga river, the awareness itself, was eternal. It is always the same. The presence to something. The quality of that presence is still actual. And this pure actuality is beyond time. It's immobile. I am always co-present to the present. And this co-presency, this co-actuality, it's something that deals with that. There is a point of immobility in my absolute mobile situation. That's all the symbol of the rhombus, which is a very esoteric symbol, highly spiritual symbol. So this is what the care of the self as conversion is all about. It means to return to the center of oneself and coming to a definitive standstill there, or returning always to that point again, 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 again. Perpetually, not speaking about eternity, but perpetually come back to the center. And the movement also of knowledge means from out to in, from out to in, from out to in. So it's not the movement of science. It's the contrary of the movement of science. The movement of science understood knowledge as exposition. Always out. That's the claim for objective. So the only thing wrong with that image is that the spinning top doesn't spin by itself, but by a movement from outside. I need to. So it is not totally independent, free autarkic. So that's the limit of the metaphor. It is not by will that the spinning top spins. She's a victim of its situation. However, there are, of course, many meanings, as I told you before, of what conversion means in the Western culture, history, especially religious history. And the most recent is eminently political. Conversion now is deeply understood, culturally talking, as revolution. And revolution is also understood politically, which is not obvious at all, because revolutio in Latin was the naming the movement of the planets. Not at all anything political. But this model of revolution, the modern one, is not directly associated with the conversion of the self to itself, but rather with the movement of solar system compared with that of history. And so there was also, nevertheless, a conversion to the citizen to the revolutionary spirit. It also happened, especially in France during 1790 until 1793. That is to say, just before the terror moments. It was that idea that the citizen must convert itself to the spirit of the revolution, to democratize itself. So there was a conversion in the revolution. This will mean that revolution and conversion doesn't mean exactly the same. Secondly, we've got the most ancient idea of conversion that comes from Plato, and in Greek it is epistrophe. Epistrophe. In French, it's an epistrophe, which is a technical vocabulary, speaking in grammar in French. So in epistrophe, an epistrophe means to turn away from sensible appearances and to access some phase of reality which is eternal. Remember the spin top. You are not looking for the moving part of reality. You are looking what in every versatile and moving appearances are always the same. That's the movement of Plato. And it is not mystical at all because you do that every day. Remember, last week I drank a can of Pepsi, right? Was it the same? Of course not. If I do that, it is not the same, right? But it is the same. So you are totally mystical in daily life. That is to say, you are considering the eternal face of phenomena because you are able to recognize everything as a fixed identity. Very easy. We are doing that every day. That's the mystery of perception. Perception is not sensation. Perception is a mix between intellectual and sensible. In perception, you are recognizing. To recognize means epistrophe. That's why this idea came from Plato, and that's why Plato is so important in the history of the West. That's the Western illumination. This epistrophe movement. So you have that in Phaedo and in Phaedrus, two major dialogues. You have also the idea to come back to oneself by discovering oneself to be ignorant. That's much more practical, a very interesting movement. So to convert yourself means to discover you ignorance. You are not the owner of knowledge. Knowledge is not something that you have. Interesting. It is, but why it's so interesting? Because it's the first total anti-capitalist way of understanding knowledge. If you believe that you can have knowledge, you have some sort of capitalist idea of knowledge, and that's why you want to accumulate. We are now living in a highly capitalist understanding of knowledge, especially here at university. We are capitalizing knowledge, accumulating knowledge. To put that in article, more. For what? For more. And Plato was totally aware of that dimension of knowledge. That is to say, the idea that you can have a knowledge, which is for Plato a total illusion. We don't have a having relationship with knowledge. So for being able to know, you have to convert yourself. You have to abandon the idea that you have knowledge. Knowledge is not something that you can have. Interesting. And you understand why you need an epistrophe. You don't need a new knowledge. You need to know that you don't know. What does it mean to know? Another form of epistrophe is the anamnesis. Anamnesis is one of the most also important vocable. It is the key of what was the real dimension of what does it mean to know. And to know deals with to recall. That is to say, to cognize means to recognize. That's why it's very interesting because knowledge is always re-knowledge. Doubled. Presentation, representation. And this is anamnesis. Mnesis in Greek, same roots as memory. Anamnesis. And ana means re. Doubled. That's quite interesting because the anamnesis is also some sort of the purpose of the Gnostic movements that Foucault was speaking here. And what does it mean? It means that to gain all the Gnostic movements claim for a liberating aspect of knowledge. That is to say, knowledge is illumination. That is to say, by accessing knowledge, you are able to free yourself. Yes, that's the idea. Salvation, cognition, the same. That's the Gnostic model. For example, when Einstein discovered the law of relative or universal relativity, or general relativity, he was not enlightened. He was maybe very happy, very satisfied, but he was not transformed. He was not converted by its own truth. So the truth in scientific framework does not have the power to free yourself, to convert. Because it's not this problem at all. But here, in this Gnostic framework, paradigm, if you want, knowledge means illumination, means freeing the subject of illusion and all kind of pathologic condition, to turn the subject in another way. And turning the subject means to return the subject to. There is always this idea to come back home. And this home means also to recall something that you knew. And some sort of alienation, some sort of bad condition, bad situation leads you to forget. So also in the Gnostic Gospels, in the Gnostic paradigm, you've got this idea that being illuminated means to recall. To get back your memory, your fundamental memory. And you have that totally in Plato. And that's why the Gnostics were both highly Platonic and Christians. Some sort of mixing about that. And what is very strange is that you've got exactly the same vocabulary in Sanskrit used by the Buddhists. My great theory is that the Buddhists were the creator of Gnosticism. The first Gnostic movement in history was Buddhism. Buddhists are totally Gnostic. Before the Gnostics, the so-called one. And you've got that anusmriti in Sanskrit. Anusmriti means exactly the same as anamnesis. And in terms of linguistics, it is exactly the same words. Anu, ana, smriti in Sanskrit, mnesis, means the same. Exactly the same. And you have that. You know that perfectly in China. Of course, you know. Name for me, please, a very, very, very well-known anamnesis practice from Buddhism, or anusmriti. You sure?
Zen?
No, not Zen. Jingtu. Omitofo. This is that. In the practices of Omitofo, you need to recall the Buddha. And for example, it's quite interesting because it is all this practice of the Jingtu school of Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, came from sutras, from texts from Jing of Buddhism that was gathered in a group named Buddha Amitabha Anusmriti. How to recall the Buddha Amitabha by visualization, by repetition of the name and stuff like that. Exactly the same. So there is Gnostics moments still in China today without knowing that. And the last one, but these four aspects of this Platonic conversion. It's not four separated moments. It is four ways of looking for the same phenomena, named epistrophe. And one also of the most fundamental is coming back home. Oh, the problem is home. Because home means nothing here. It is this, which is very essential. Usia, which was translated, remember, in Latin as essentia. And essentia, or essence, means property. Even private property. It can be used for your garden. My home is my usia. If you are using that vocabulary in a non-metaphysical dimension. But nevertheless, usia is both metaphysical or ontological and totally practical. It means my property. And this is playing. This is a play. That is to say, coming back home, that is to say, coming back to your own essential. That is to say, discovered what is really yours, your proper. From the ontological home. What is absolutely
that is to say, eternally proper to you, that cannot be altered, that cannot be moved, if that's possible. Maybe it's totally impossible to have something in you which is beyond any sort of change. And the third one, so you've got revolution, epistrophe, and the Christians, metanoia. Metanoia, you also have that in Plato. But it was totally assumed by the Christians, who were also disciples of Plato. Not so Jewish, very, very Platonic. And Aristotelian after in another way. So we've got the Christian metanoia, also speaking Greek. And metanoia means first something which is provoked by an event. What is an event? Why the idea of event and eventness is interesting ontologically talking. Because it creates a break in the space-time line. There is a before and an after. For example, give me an example of a way of thinking which is totally against some sort of metaphysics of eventness, which is still very modern, by the way. From Heidegger to Marion, to many French phenomenologists, but now also in journalism. Journalism belongs to the religion of events. They want to create events. But we are dealing with that. And this idea that when something happens, for real, it creates. It creates by introducing a break in the time and space-time. So what is the philosophy totally against that? No. Cybernetics, they are not. The cybernetic is not a philosophy.
Conservatism? Conservatism.
No. Because conservatism means that you want to select among many events the one you want to keep.
Determinism.
No, not necessarily true. Because you can fix some determination. If you believe that event is creating history, that's a sort of determinism. Not a natural one, but an historical one. Hegel is totally determinist in terms of eventness. Now, don't look in the West. In the West, we are totally determined. No, Buddhism are really linked with events, of course. Yeah. Because you've got a personal life of the Buddha who did something. That is to say, he put his ass under a tree and did some stuff. Illumination. Event. Before illumination, of course they were clever. Because if illumination is only an event, it means that it's almost nothing. So, after the Buddha's so-called illumination, many texts happened that try to claim that the Buddha was only one Buddha amongst many. Before in the past and in the future. Milo, for example, is the waiting Buddha. So it was a way of not so ontologizing the event of illumination, which is not as unique, but nevertheless, it is still unique. So Buddhism deals with the metaphysics of event. It tried to tame it a bit. But taming is not jumping out. Give me a philosophy which is totally not dependent
of any sort of metaphysics of evidence. That's my, I love that. Because I can ask the question only to you. And there is no answer, so it's amazing. For giving you some clue. If I ask the same question in Paris, if no students are able to answer, I can understand. But here, I'm a bit shocked. Daoism going with the idea of Chang, of ordinarity, Changde. That's totally against that. There is no philosophy much more anti-Occident or anti-West than Daoism.
But didn't Daoism have some kind of epiphany, like?
Not in Laozi.
Yeah. Not in Lao, but in Zhuangzi.
In Zhuangzi, this is tales.
Yeah.
When you tell a story, you need some sort of epiphany, and you don't know if that epiphany is the consequence of the philosophy itself or of the rhetoric. That is to say, the way of presenting it. And I believe it is the way of presenting. So there is a storytelling in Zhuangzi that you don't have in Laozi, but nevertheless, the fact that the way you claim Chang at that moment, and even the way of speaking in terms of thought, what sort of event there is if you think from thought? There is no meaning. There is no event in thought. So, event doesn't mean happening. Be careful. To happen is not an event. Events create being. Event is a being giver. The death and the resurrection of the Christ, this is a fucking event. That is to say, it creates history. It creates time. There is a before the Christ and an after the Christ. It creates everything. And in Christianism, which is totally determined by the metaphysics of events, even the world came from an event named the creation. The creation is an event. The creation is understood from the idea of pure happening. That's why it was named in Latin creatio, creation, ex nihilo, from nothing. But this is event. We say that no, that's a metaphysics of a craftsman. Sure, no craftsman, because a craftsman cannot create from nothing. Only the pure event is creation from nothing. So that's why, at the moment when the West, especially Europe, came to recall about its own philosophical history, that is to say, the last part of the 20th century, and still the beginning of the new millennium, we spoke a lot about the philosophy and the phenomenology and the metaphysics of events. But it was not something new. It was the most ancient, which was anamnesis, recalled to us. How we were determined by the idea that being happened. The happiness of being, it is event. Not an event, but the event. So remember, we've got, because it is an eventness way of understanding the conversion, the great turn, without coming back. a break in history. You've got, it's very binary, very dualistic. The after is not anymore linked with the before. And the idea that the movement, the conversion movement, is a rupture. That is to say, you have to renounce to yourself for becoming yourself. You have to break something in you. You have to die for becoming alive. Stuff like that. It's highly Christian. What Foucault is trying to show here is that during antiquity, in addition to epistrophe and metanoia, there was a third meaning possible of conversion, which was precisely that, developed not as thematically as it could be interesting to be, but which was developed by these groups of Hellenistics and Roman schools of philosophy, and especially Cynics, Stoics, and Epicureans. And skeptics also, but unfortunately Foucault did not know very well the skeptic school. And and here Foucault was pretty strongly influenced by the French philosopher Pierre Hadot, and especially in that book, published just very close to the course given by Foucault, Spiritual Experience and Ancient Philosophy. If you want these texts, I have it on PDF in English translation. That's very strange. I'm not a huge fan of Pierre Hadot. I read him a lot. And I believe he's out. He's not understanding what philosophy means. But nevertheless, according to the problem staged here by Foucault, why not? It's a good reference. To understand what philosophy means, I'm not sure. And so, especially the Plato and Aristotle moment, which were very determining. So, what's the idea of Pierre Hadot? It is to claim that philosophy was, during the Greek period, not as logical or theoretical as it seems to be, and that it was emphasized and explained by the traditions, the Western tradition. You consider, for example, that the Greek philosophy was the basis of the modern theoretical sciences, logic, geometry, math, stuff like that. And Hadot tended to prove, according to text, he was a very good Greek reader, text analyzer, to prove that Greek philosophy was much more practical. It was some sort of experience, spiritual experience, like religious one in a certain way, and that tended to build a lifestyle. That is to say, philosophy was not having theories or producing theories, or as Deleuze said, to produce concepts, but to live your life in a certain way. Which means that conceptions, ideas, stuff like that were not the job of philosophy during antiquity, but bios. Remember, bios in Greek does not mean the bios that you have in biology. Biology is the sense of natural life. Bios in Greek means cultural life. Nothing to do. There is no natural bios for the Greek. Bios is by definition anti-natural. It's totally cultural. And the deep thesis of Pirado was to prove by texts that philosophy deals or dealt only with beings. How to find a new being. How to find a new way of living. A new lifestyle. For the theory. For the idea. That's pretty true in Epicureanism, but the problem is that Epicureanism, we don't have so much text left. It was not philosophically highly interesting. The Stoics, well, many Stoics were totally theorizing, like Chrysippus, for example. Other Stoicians were, yes, forming groups, and like Zeno. Epictetus, yes, he formed a school, but it was highly theoretical. It was really a school, like us today. So, this is not as true as, or as convincing as Pirado wanted to do that. But nevertheless, it's an interesting idea. That is to say, philosophy does not deal essentially with ideas, but with lifestyle. And so, in Pirado, you've got this partition between Platonic epistrophe, considered as epistemic, that is to say, it is a change that happens in knowledge itself, and metanoia, which is a change or a transformation that happens in being itself. Very easy to understand, right? If you believe that the world was created, this is an ontological metanoia. Before nothing, after something. Metanoia, change. Nothing, something. Right? But which deals with reality. It's not a way of changing your point of view. If you change your point of view, this is an epistemological conversion. If you create something new, it is an ontological. So it was well seen by Pirado. We speak about conversion, but what we are speaking about, it is not clear. Epistemological, ontological conversion, political conversion. And that's why the model for the Platonic epistrophe as an epistemological conversion was some sort of awakening. Awakening might be also a way of translating anamnesis. Because when you recall, there is some sort of illumination. You are not recalling, by recalling about something, you recall yourself in a certain way. Or you recall the self of yourself, or the truth of yourself. And so, highly Buddhist, also highly Buddhist. This epistrophe is an awakening. The model is illumination. That's very highly Platonic. But in Christianism, there is no illumination. You are not illuminated in Christianity. Sainthood is no illumination. It is something totally ontological. That is to say, you are reboot. You are reborn. Remember the fact that many US people, that religion in the United States is something totally baroque, made by freaks. And there is this idea to be reborn, the born again, remember. That is to say, the one who were raised in Protestantism or Christianism, and they lost their religion, became atheists, and at the age of 50, they came back to Christianism. And this coming back this rediscovering of Christianism in the United States were accurately named to be reborn or born again. Interesting. And why it is interesting? Because it speaks this language. It speaks a very ancient way of understanding conversion in a almost genetical way, ontological. It is not only a way of understanding, it is a way of being. So the salvation in Platonic framework and the salvation in Christianism framework are not the same, despite the fact that Christianism was highly Platonic. But many change was made to subtle and change everything. And in that context, the Roman Hellenistics conversion seems to be a turning of the way of looking, of the gaze towards oneself, but in a modality different from this vigilance, cautious, and some sort of suspicious cautious of Christian monasticism, which consists in tracking down the presence of the sin or infringement of God's law. So the conversion in Hellenistic and Roman philosophy that speaks about the care of the self deals with the way of turning the gaze. That is to say, you have to be able to look at yourself. That's very difficult. For example, if I ask each of you to give me exactly the sequences of your thoughts that happens from the beginning of that course. List me at 4:01, I thought about that. At 4:02, I thought about that. Are you able to do that? So you are not looking yourself. You are totally ignorant about your own thoughts, movements, and feelings, and sensation, and emotion. You are nowhere. You are not in your own experience of the world. You don't have a relation with yourself when you are interacting with the world. You are a ghost. Interesting. That haunts your whole experience. And the conversion of the Roman Christian, of the Roman Hellenistic philosophies deals a lot with that. That is, are you able to be aware of you in each one of your experiences? That is said to be in both object and subject. In each of your experiences. To multiply your experience like a mirror. And what is important here, and that's why Foucault was clever. Be careful, this is not vigilance. You know, vigilance, the vigilance was the practice of the monk. All the day, the monk has to pay attention to themselves. So we should say, okay, you are, these monastics, Christian monastics disciplines of the care of the self, cautious, worried, seems to be the same. Not the same at all. Because in the monastics, Christianism, because you believe in that, by believing in that, it means that you are not looking to have a relationship with yourself. You want to kill yourself in a certain way. You have to abandon yourself. So the type of look that you are posing to yourself is something like a judge. Someone who, be careful, that soap is thin.
that feeling is sin. That way of behaving, sin. So you are the judge of yourself. Not here. Here you are absolutely no judge of yourself. You are co-present with you. You are with you. Do you know what I'm saying? In the Christian relationship with yourself, and especially in the vigilance practices, this is a trial. This is a process. This is the law. There is a judge, and no attorney, no lawyer. So that's not the same organization, inside organization. So what's this way of looking? Looking inward the self as a detour from amusement or curiosity, and more particularly from curiosity about others. First, you have to cut curiosity. Curiosity. Because curiosity is entertainment. Being curious during a very long time, and maybe a good time, was not good at all. Now we are saying that curiosity is a quality, especially for the children. They are curious, they like to, there seems to be interest in many, many, many things. No. During the past time in the West, it was a very bad habit. Because being curious means being not focused. Means being diverted. Being always out of yourself. So, first way to convert your gaze is to stop being curious. Especially being curious about others. That's my situation, for example. My wife, it hurts maybe the Chinese feeling. My wife, she's Chinese. And she's totally amazed how I don't care about the life of the people. I'm not curious about the others. I'm interested, but I'm not curious. I say I don't want to know if they are married or they have children, or I don't care. And that's an idea of curiosity. That's quite interesting because I noticed that in China you are very curious with others. Wants to know very quickly. Are you married? You're not anymore. Oh, you're a bit fatty now. Oh, you're skinny now. But you're married? No, with you. That's a thought quoted from Marcus Aurelius. Do not use the part of your life that is left to you to imagine what others are doing. That's very well seen. You are not curious. You try to imagine the world, and especially the world of the other. It is not knowledge. It is imagination. This is Disney World. This is not knowledge. It is fantasy. This maybe should mean that it is impossible. Maybe that's an open question. Maybe it's impossible to know someone else. When you believe that you know someone else, maybe you are just imagining. That's just imagination. You are figuring yourself that they are living something that you lived, you. Maybe the only possible knowledge is the knowledge of yourself. That's an interesting idea. You have that idea in Husserl, for example. When you try to understand intersubjectivity, that's a very difficult question. How is that possible? To have an intersubjectivity when you pose that the subject exists.
And in Husserl, the knowledge of the other subject is partly imagination. In Kant, also. The first to understand the knowledge of the others, which is not the knowledge of something, was Kant. And he introduced imagination. Because, of course, when you know someone else, an alter ego, it seems to reflect you as an ego too. And, of course, it's almost natural to project. You can know reality, but you cannot understand reality. But I can understand you because I understand me. I am not only knowing myself, I am understanding myself. And that's why maybe I'm able to understand the other and not only knowing them. Or maybe I cannot know someone else, but only understand someone else. This is the German philosopher Dilthey that spoke about that. The difference between knowing and understanding. And for example, Dilthey was a theoretician for the human sciences. Renmin. And he separates the paradigm of the natural sciences, which is the paradigm of knowledge, and the paradigm of human sciences, which is a bit ambiguous, because it is both knowledge and understanding. So let's go back here to the conversion of the gate, the practice of that conversion. So be careful to not divert attention, and you have to return, you have to focus. It's an exercise of attention on to what depends on us. That is to say, you have to consider what is your part, what is yours. And that's a distinction not easy to do. You can, but for example, in Stoicism, why there is philosophy in Stoicism? Because you have to understand what you can want. You have to determine the proper object of your will, which is not easy. For example, I want to be famous. But being famous, this object, is that something that you, as you, can want? You can only want what depends on you. But Gloria, being famous, is not something that depends only about you. And maybe it depends very few about you. So if you spend your life to want something which is not a proper object of the will, you will spend your life very unhappy, frustrated, because you don't understand the limits of the object of your will. That's why Stoicism was a philosophy of the will. The concern for the self in Stoicism, it is the attention and the limitation and the discipline of the will. Willing is a power, but a limited one, that tends to consider itself as without limits. Aristotle saw that perfectly. And how can you do that? And that's, on that point, something very interesting. How can you do that? To come back to your own paths, to determine your path, and come back to it. First, by studying the secrets of nature. Strange. Not by making a psychoanalysis. To study the secrets of nature, to study also the human history. You can also do retreats to the countryside, which was named anakoresis in Greek. Why am I speaking about anakoresis? Because anakoresis, it is the Greek name for monks. In the, you know that the beginning of the Christianism spoke Greek, not Latin. Anakoresis, to monkify yourself, to be as a monk. It's very interesting. Ana, beside, koresis comes from kora. Kora is a very strange word, because you have that in Plato, in the Timaeus. And kora, it's a place without place. It's kora, it is the same root as chaos. That is to say, it is not a concept. It is something very strange. It is almost, it can some sort of emptiness. Shunyata, kon in Chinese, kora. Yeah. So you put yourself in that no man's land. You put yourself in some sort of nowhere. You disappear. That's a wealth to convert. Okay. And you've got also to apply some exercise of non-curiosity. That's what you say. Epipologagnosune. Non-curious. You have to exercise yourself to be not curious. For example, when you are driving and there is an accident, you are not looking at the accident. You are keeping your gaze right. And you see perfectly in that situation that curiosity is not something that deals with discipline. Curiosity is some sort of reflex, instinct. You need a discipline. You need an exercise to be not curious. Plato gave the example of course, dead bodies. In Athens, in the harbor of Athens, named Pire. In the Pire harbor of Athens, they left dead bodies like trash. And it was very difficult for the people that walk around the wall of that harbor to not looking the dead bodies. And Plato said you have to be focused, not looking the dead bodies. That's curiosity. So you needed to be exercised in non-curiosity. Curiosity is much more relevant in Greek. It's polou. Polou in Greek means many. Pragmosune. Pragmata means affairs, cases, especially affairs. Even sexual ones. Having an affair, in Greek it is pragmate. You're concerned by the reality. So, polou pragmosune, you have too much things to deal with in your mind. Sune, at the end. Too much things to deal with in your mind. So, empty means no. Against having too much things in your mind. And for example, and this is a true example, you have to walk for an hour without looking beside. Up, down, just straight. Interesting. If someone is calling you, no answer. You're focused. You've got also exercise in double focus, on the self-presence and on the self as a goal. That is to say, you have to consider yourself as a purpose, and you have to be present with yourself. It's a double attention. You have to have an idea of yourself that you want to reach, and you have to be with yourself. That's also a way of looking, a double attention, which deals with a double inside attention. That is to say, intentionality, intention to yourself, and attention to yourself. Not the same. You understand? Intention, attention. I am with myself, attention. I am in the sight of myself, I am focused to myself, intention. Intention, attention. There is no direction in attention. In attention, there is still presence. I keep presence present. So I keep myself here in each of my experience. You can do that now if you want. No? Touch yourself. Touch your hands. Touch your hands. Touch it. And you see the pain, and you see the doubleness of experience. That is to say, in human experience, you've got the object of the experience, and you've got yourself with the object of the experience. So dualism is always in human experience, but it is not very dualistic, because it is in the experience. So it is not separated. It is rich. It is numerous. We are with ourselves. That's being a subject. And this way of being a subject is not something given totally. It means that you have to cultivate it. So, and Foucault, after that, links, or maybe confused, I think much more confused, two dimensions of attention that don't go totally together. You've got the constant self-presence, and you've got the concentration of a single goal. That is to say, here, on this double focus on self-presence and the self as goal, Foucault seems to mix together, as I told you, intention and attention. It is not totally the same paradigm of them. And it's quite interesting because Foucault, when he was speaking about that, he was using, as an example, the very strange book of Erich Erigel, German book, Zen in the Art of Archery, Zen in der Kunst der Bogenschießen. Erich Erigel was a German guy who lived in Japan a long time, and he was initiated in archery. And he wrote an amazing book about that, especially about the relation between intention and attention. And the problem is that he's quoting that book, and he's not using too much that book. Because in that book, you've got a clear separation between the practices of attention and the practices of intention. And the Stoics were much close to the practice of intention. That is to say, being focused. Like, you've got that in United States movies with guns, stuff like that. You're very focused. Like a machine, And that's much more Stoician. That's where you have to concentrate your gaze on one point. But in Zen, it is much more open. That is to say, you are always here. You try to never forget yourself in the experience. You try to forget nothing. You try always to enrich the presence, to be more and more present to the present. And that's much more Buddhist, or much more fed experience. So here what Foucault fails to see is the inverse role of the will between attention and intention. In the Japanese practice of archery and in the theological concentration of Stoicism. In Stoicism, you have to focus the will. You have to discipline the will. In the Zen discipline of archery, you have to abandon. That is to say, you have to open an attention without goal. So, without intention. You know, that's the definition of intentionality. Intentionality means it is the power of the mind to target. So that's very paradoxical. And it was paradoxically explained to you in 10, when you're in archery. That is to say, in China, or Buddhism. You have to want without wanting. You have to throw your arrow without targeting. And if you are not targeting, it will match. It is always explained paradoxically, because it is an attention without intention. So, because Foucault was not very aware of that, he's confusing two aspects. And I deeply believe that Stoicism has nothing to do with Zen or Chan arts of archery. No. It is another paradigm. Opening and focusing. In the Chan dimension, there is some sort of absence of intentionality, and in the teleological focusing or concentration of Stoicism, you've got some sort of straightening of the will. And remember, Stoicism is a philosophy of the will, and especially of the concentration of the will. That's why you have to make the parts between what is mine and what is not mine. Because when you do that, you focus your will, and will becomes a power, like an arrow that pierces reality. So, remember that the Stoics came from Rome and Greek, that is to say, from the countries of soldier and warrior. That deals with war. And here Foucault equates trajectory from the self to self with the present to the self. And these two dimensions are not exactly the same. So be careful when you are reading Foucault on that point. He is not as clear as it might be. Having yourself present to yourself as an object, as a goal, is not the same as being present to yourself. It's not exactly the same experience. Secondly, you've got also looking inward the self and knowing the world. And you've got among the cynics, and especially among that cynic named Demetrius, which was a Roman cynic, the promotion of a pragmatic and even economic model of knowledge that gather within oneself all the science that is truly useful and necessary. That's the job of philosophy, to focus in a good way. The range of the scope of knowledge. And it is made on the model of the athletes. You have to train yourself. You have to be prepared. The athletes practice only victorious techniques. or the warrior, who must arm himself with weapons that will really serve him. There is an economical and training dimension of the self, like survival stuff. And for that purpose, Demetrius, which is very paradoxical, opposed skole, remember, the free time, and the time of the free man. The time for philosophy was skole, opium. And he was opposed to skole, which he considered as vain research or vain knowledge. But it was stupid. But we have to name that, because it's an aspect of the care of the self. Taking care of yourself, you have to become a survivalist. You have to be able to live without nothing in the jungle. There is this idea, and it was pretty some sort of fashion. For example, in the net, in the internet, you've got many guys that they want to come back and to live in the jungle without a stick of wood, a knife, and an axes. And why do you do that? That's a strange idea. There is no need to do that. Why do you want to economize yourself? Because that's very Stoics and Cynic. You are concentrating economically your condition for life. And by concentrating, there is this feeling of force. You feel yourself powerful because you need almost nothing to be. Just a knife, some matches, maybe not no matches, and you can kill a tiger by yourself. So it's a way of emphasizing yourself to be able to need almost nothing. To be, let's say to live. And that's the way of Demetrius. Seek knowledge that strains the mind, not knowledge that serves only for ornament. And in the name of that idea, to strain your own subjectivity, you need to economize. And for economizing, you need to cast out everything which is not directly helpful or not necessary. So knowledge, or a certain form of knowledge, can be considered as subjectively not relevant. And what is that knowledge? What is that the knowledge that is absolutely necessary to know or to get? It is first, you have to know that you don't need to fear man. You have to know that you don't need to fear God. You have to know that death produces no harm or no pain. And you have to know that virtue is easy to get, to acquire. And also you have to know that we are naturally made to live in society or in the world. We are not separated at all. We are made for that, with no problem. It's very close, this Cynic's Penta 5 principle, let's say, 5 things that you have to know. Or understand, if you want. It's a sort of knowledge. Very close to the Tetra, Pharmakos, of the Epicurean. It's a formula in 4 sentences, staged not by Epicure but by Daoism. And what's interesting, it is not named knowledge, it is not pharmakos, that is to say remedy. Pharmakos is interesting because pharmakon in Greek means also poison. It is poison and remedy. Both. For example, my first name is Alexis, which is a Greek name. And in many texts in Greek, you got Alexis Pharmakoi.
And Alexis means, in Greek, means to defend, to protect. So when you take Alexis pharmakon, you take a pharmakon, a remedy against poison. It is a pharmakon against pharmakon. Strange idea. An anti-poison. If you are bitten by a snake, for example, you have to take Alexis pharmakon, an anti-poison. So, or something that protects you from the poison. And you have that, also that idea that knowledge is something that needs to cure. A very highly pragmatical and pragmaticist conception of knowledge deal with the necessity to economize yourself. Not, remember, it is always how to convert your way of looking, how to be focused. You have to cut curiosity. And in the cynics, a large part of knowledge is curiosity. I am totally disagree with that. By the way, that's nevertheless, why not? It's a logic. And you have that at work still today. It's a very still a common idea. So here self-knowledge is not opposed to knowledge of the world. Nor does it mean looking only within oneself and never outside oneself. Be careful. And that's why it's original. These practices, this conversion of the gaze, does not mean that you are doing psychology. You are not looking that way yourself. It's another kind of knowledge, which is not as informational, but oriented toward ataraxia. It is knowledge that can bring you peace. It is knowledge that brings you that health, some sort of health. And more precisely, it's knowledge that's not so much about things or even about the self, but about the self relationship to everything. What is useful and necessary to know is how to relate to the things around us and to remain, as it was said by Demetrius here, solid and serene. And it is not in Chinese, not in Chinese, in Latin, solido et neres nostra, sereno nostra. We are solid and serene. And it's prescriptive knowledge, or we should say in Latin, sententious knowledge, because it's made with formula. Like pharmakon, it is formula. And it is prescriptive knowledge and not descriptive. It tells you what to do. It is a knowledge that tells you what to do. Prescriptive, not descriptive. It's not really my cup of tea. Coming from phenomenology, phenomenology is highly descriptive, not prescriptive. And so, in this sense, too, it is essentially ethical knowledge. Because of that prescription, moral prescription for becoming yourself. In a very original sense, that is to say, it relates to human inhabitation, habitation, habits. Remember, that's the meaning of ethics. Ethics in Greek first means habitation, homing, familiarity, stuff like that. So how to get yourself home, how to home yourself, how to be familiar with your own experience. Let's see that. Okay, so we will do that next time.
just here, because it is announcing some stuff that we will see after. In Epicurean, you got that idea essential that physiology, physiologia, but physiology does not mean at all physiology. Physiology now it's the knowledge of the living human body, how it circulates. So here it means intelligence of nature. Physis, logos. So you have to understand how things works for real. That's the idea of Epicurus. If you're not understanding the way nature is actually working, you are living in an illusion. And that's why he developed an atomistic, materialistic conception of nature. And he said, stuff are working like that. So don't try to live a life out of that, because you will live in an illusion. That's physiologia. That means that for convert your gaze, to turn your way of looking in that way, you have to know nature, not yourself. That's the main idea of Foucault here. In that practices and theory of the care of the self, during this period, there is no idea to know yourself. There is no idea even to cure yourself. But something maybe that just you have to know how things work to be able to be in. So it is related to yourself. That's the core idea. And why it's interesting to do that? Because we are living in a time where nothing is related to us anymore. And many things tend to be separated from us. We are cast outside reality. More and more and more and more. That's very strange. Now with the artificial intelligence, it's the same movement. Artificial intelligence is not revolutionary at all. Not at all. Since the first industrial machines, it was the same movement. They say we are much more cast outside reality that doesn't need us anymore to work. So, that's why Foucault was speaking about that. That's why it was the last course he gave before dying. Because he said, be careful, there is one risk. We are disappearing. We are putting ourselves out of reality. That's strange. That's the core of nihilism. We are not here anymore as subjects. But be careful, the criticism of subjectivity is not that. It's something else. That's why sometimes it's highly ambiguous. Here he's not speaking about the metaphysics of the subject, which is not the same. I talked to you about that at the beginning of the course. Here it is an act of resistance. That is to say, we are living in a time in which we tend to be in exile. And for example, you have to read, if you have that, the opportunity, you have to read the books of Günter Anders. Very difficult, emotional book. Günter Anders. And that book, I don't know how it is translated in, because in German it is the Antiquität des Menschen, which means the antiquitization of man. In French, it was badly translated by the obsolescence of man. Obsolescence means you are date out. I cannot eat you anymore. So it's maybe not the best. Antiquité, that is to say, in French we should say désuétude. It would be interesting. I don't know how it was translated in English. You have a Günter Anders. It's in 2 volumes. Pretty difficult. No, maybe not so difficult to find. I'm going to check if I have it. I have it in German, but I don't have it in English. Günter Anders. Also, he was also named Günter Stern.
Obsolescence of man.
Yeah, they translate as such, obsolescence of man.
Yeah, English. In English.
So, the English, you discover that the English is not a German translation. It is a French. It is come from the French. Obsolescence. Obsolescence. Obsolescence means much more peremption. That is to say, it is out of date. You cannot eat that anymore. And I believe that in German it was antiquitiert. Something like that. Tiert. And antiquitiert, that means it's too old. It's
Antique.
yeah, it's antique. Yeah, exactly. So it could be something like the antiquitification of man, something like that. And this is an amazing book. If you want to understand what does it mean to be exiled of the world. And he's thinking from the Industrial Revolution to atomic bomb. It was a book written in 1956, the first volume. And you will see that we are now living that. We are living in that moment. You want to know the truth of our present time? It was written a long time before. And that's why this Foucault was clever to understand that the criticism of the subject was something. Be careful with that. No self. No. Be careful. When you are claiming for the no self dimension, no, you are also participating in the movement of nihilism, which is also to cast humanity outside of reality. Because of techniques. That's why Anders was a student of Heidegger, of course. It is all the texts devoted to technology that bring out the essence of man. In Heidegger, technology is a device that puts out of reality the essence of man. That's
It was
this.
translated into Chinese.
It was translated in Chinese?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good luck. What's the title in Chinese?
过时的人 man outdated. The man
Outdated.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is better. Because there is war.
Yeah.
So there is this idea of time, history, that you don't have in obsolescence. Okay. So, okay, we don't care about that. Yeah, just you have that ID, and after that you don't need to know any more about that chapter. The knowledge of stars has no other end than ataraxia. You know the stars. Why? For being able to be happy. That is to be free from pain. Because you know your place in the world. That is physiologia. By understanding in nature, you are able to understand your place, your situation. And when you understand your situation, you can be yourself. So it's a placing understanding. It's a situating understanding of the self. Okay, see you next week.